Perjalanan Global Peace Mission Malaysia (GPM) dalam misi Kemanusiaan Merentasi Sempadan memasuki tahun ke-19 perubahannya pada tahun 2020. GPM yang ditubuhkan pada 26 September 2001, ekoran pengisytiharan perang oleh Amerika Syarikat serta tercetusnya peperangan di Afghanistan, telah memulakan misi bantuan kemanusiaan dan perubatan di sana pada awal Oktober tahun yang sama. Semenjak itu, GPM terus mengorak langkah dalam memperjuangkan keamanan sejagat melalui bantuan kemanusiaan dan usaha advokasi berterusan dan konsisten. Usaha ini berjalan seiring dengan misi mengekalkan kecemerlangan, meningkatkan kecekapan serta menambah baik keberkesanan organisasi dalam gerak kerja bantuan kemanusiaan di peringkat lokal dan global. Tahun 2020 menjadi satu tahun yang amat penting bagi GPM. Justru GPM telah menggariskan 6 teras utama dalam memastikan ia terus kekal relevan dan efektif dalam menjadi organisasi utama di Malaysia dalam menyalurkan bantuan kemanusiaan. Berikut adalah 6 teras utama GPM. Bantuan kemanusiaan, advokasi, pendidikan untuk semua, pembangunan komuniti, pemerkasaan relawan, kecekapan pengurusan. Teras yang pertama adalah bantuan kemanusiaan. GPM komited untuk menjadi antara mereka yang pertama sampai di lapangan untuk mengenal pasti keperluan dan seterusnya menyalurkan bantuan kemanusiaan kepada mereka yang memerlukan. GPM membantu mereka yang berada di dalam kesusahan disebabkan oleh kejadian bencana alam, konflik peperangan, kemiskinan, keadaan politik yang tidak stabil maupun ancaman kepada keselamatan diri kerana ditindas di negara sendiri. Sejumlah 11 juta ringgit disasarkan bagi tujuan ini dan pecahannya adalah seperti berikut: Winter Aid for the Needy, Iftar for the Needy, Kurban for the Needy, Food for the Needy, Water, Sanitation, Hygiene, Malaysia Lifeline for Syria, Rahmat. Di bawah teras advokasi pula, dana sejumlah RM200,000 diperlukan dalam usaha untuk memperjuangkan keamanan serta menyampaikan keprihatinan masyarakat dalam mana-mana situasi yang mengancam keselamatan, kesejahteraan, keadilan, keamanan dan keharmonian mana-mana individu maupun kelompok masyarakat tertentu, dan ianya harus disuarakan dan diketengahkan. Aktiviti-aktiviti advokasi dan pecahannya adalah seperti berikut: rundingan meja bulat, persidangan antarabangsa, penerbitan tulisan, artikel, media. Menerusi teras pembangunan komuniti, GPM berusaha untuk memperbaiki serta mempertingkatkan taraf sosial dan juga kualiti kehidupan masyarakat. Ianya merangkumi aspek ekonomi, pendidikan, kesihatan dan pembangunan penempatan. Dan untuk itu sejumlah RM1,200,000 dana diperlukan bagi memenuhi keperluan dan juga projek seperti pecahan berikut: mikrokredit, pembangunan wanita dan kanak-kanak, masjid komuniti, perpustakaan dan pusat pendidikan, pusat pembangunan skill komuniti, penempatan. Seterusnya, teras pendidikan untuk semua yang menjadi teras utama perjuangan GPM. Objektifnya adalah memastikan keperluan kanak-kanak dan remaja untuk belajar dapat dipenuhi, dan bagi memastikan usaha ini dapat dijayakan dengan sebaiknya, jumlah RM5 juta diperlukan bagi keperluan dan pecahan seperti berikut: kembali ke sekolah, pembangunan sekolah, pusat pendidikan, pentadbiran sekolah, pusat pendidikan, sekolah lapangan, beasiswa. Teras yang kelima adalah pemerkasaan relawan. Relawan merupakan nadi yang sangat penting dalam dunia kemanusiaan. Namun begitu, sukarelawan yang terlibat harus dilengkapkan dengan ilmu pengetahuan, termasuk latihan-latihan yang sewajarnya agar mampu menyumbang bakti dan memberi impak yang positif dalam apa jua aktiviti yang dilaksanakan. Maka, sejumlah RM450,000 dana yang diperlukan bagi menggerakkan projek-projek dan pecahannya adalah seperti berikut: bengkel dan kem latihan, Kelab GPM dan Duta Ciri Kemanusiaan, persidangan kepimpinan sukarelawan, program Perantis. Bagi memastikan segala perancangan serta usaha bantuan oleh GPM untuk tahun 2020 berjalan dengan lancar, ianya memerlukan komitmen pengurusan yang mantap dan juga efektif. Justru, keperluan pentadbiran dan juga pengurusan harus diambil kira dan ia membawa kita kepada teras yang terakhir GPM, iaitu kecekapan pengurusan. Sejumlah RM2,150,000 dana yang diperlukan bagi memenuhi keperluan pengurusan seperti berikut: pentadbiran personel, latihan, keperluan pejabat dan peralatan, pengurusan pejabat. GPM 2020 mensasarkan bantuan utama disalurkan ke beberapa buah negara seperti Malaysia, Palestin, Syria dan Yaman, termasuk beberapa buah negara lain yang berada di benua yang berikut. Dan pastinya tidak dilupakan masyarakat yang sedang ditindas seperti masyarakat Rohingya, Uyghur dan juga Kashmir. Sejumlah RM20 juta keseluruhan dana diperlukan bagi menjayakan GPM 2020 ini, dan ianya memerlukan komitmen serta sokongan tidak berbelah bagi daripada semua pihak, sama ada di peringkat kerajaan, swasta maupun masyarakat keseluruhannya. Ayo, sama-sama kita menjayakan GPM 2020 dan terus berjuang demi keamanan sejagat. Salam keamanan daripada kami. Terima kasih.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, our honorable guests and our distinguished guests, dear member of our audience. Now that we are fired up from the keynote and the gimmick session, let us march forward to our second session of the day, which brings the topic Cautious Optimism of the Future of Afghanistan. Moving right along, it is now my pleasure to give you a brief introduction to our moderator for this session. He is now the Deputy Director, Student Development and Community Engagement, IIUM. Despite his many academic commitments, Dr. Zulkifli is also active in community works, sitting as the chairman of Muslim Youth Movement of Malaysia, Negeri Sembilan, board member of Sekolah Rendah Islam Seremban, and chairman of MyCom for SDG. And to help us delve a little bit more into the session, I would like to introduce our panelists for this morning. The first panelist for this morning is the founding CEO of International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies Malaysia, IAIS, yang berbahagia Profesor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali. The second panel is the senior lecturer of the Department of Strategic and International Studies, University Malaya, Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers. And the third panel will be the founding director of Bait Al-Amanah, Dr. Abdul Razak Ahmad. And to moderate this session, let us welcome Associate Professor Dr. Zulkifli Hassan to begin our session. Please, Dr. Zul.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And very good morning. Thank you to the MC, yang berbahagia Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, Tan Sri Dr. Syed Hamid Alba, former Minister of Foreign Affairs Malaysia, His Excellency Muhammad Yusuf Kala, former Vice President of Indonesia, His Excellency Fahad Kafut, Ambassador of the State of Qatar, Her Excellency Ms. Amna Baluch, High Commissioner of Pakistan, all the respected speakers, moderators, our respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, a very warm welcome to you, to all, to Kuala Lumpur Conference on Afghanistan, Re-emergence of a Nation. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, let us start with all praises be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Peace and blessing be upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. First and foremost, on behalf of the organizer, I would like to graciously extend our utmost gratitude to all of you who are present today and joining this great conference. We hope that all of you may stay with us till the ends of the programs. A quick word about and brief information about these sessions. The format will be very simple and easy. We have 90 minutes and share in at about 11:30. Each speaker will deliver about 20 minutes or extra time, 5 to 6 minutes if needed. And we will allocate another half an hour or less for questions and answer sessions. But ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the theme of this session is cautious optimism of the future of Afghanistan. The United States has ended its 20-year war in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is back in charge. So there are numerous responses and statements pertaining to the recent situation in Afghanistan. The situation in Afghanistan now remains highly uncertain and changing rapidly. For instance,
Recording in
the
progress.
BBC poll finds that the majority of Afghans still strongly oppose the return of the Taliban. China has offered to host a meeting between the Afghan government and Taliban, but has declined to mediate. Pakistan opposes a military solution to the Afghan conflict and favors intra-Afghan dialogues. UNICEF is cautiously optimistic over preserving the gains made in education with a work plan with the Taliban to open community-based schools, including a focus on girls' education. And finally, the Taliban political head, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, stated that the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan wants diplomatic and trade ties with all countries, particularly with the United States of America. So hence, the session is very, very important to explore the key points and to highlight the overall analysis about the reality and cautious optimism of the Afghanistan futures. What does that mean for the future of Afghanistan? The political settlement or the collapse? Or what are the future scenarios of Afghanistan? So ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, after listening to Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia on peaceful coexistence, the way forward for Afghanistan, now we have the opportunity to listen from another three more prominent speakers, Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali, the founding CEO of IAIS Malaysia, Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers, Senior Lecturer of the Department of Strategy and International Studies, University Malaya, and our third speaker, Dr. Abdul Raza Ahmad, the Founding Director of Baitul Amanah. So the theme of this session, once again, is cautious optimism of the future of Afghanistan. I will not prolong my introductions, but allow me to introduce the first speaker, Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali. And Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali actually needs no introductions, but allow me to briefly and highlight some interesting facts about Professor Kamali. Number one, he's my professor, he's my guru, he's my sifu in the International Islamic University. I took two subjects with Professor Kamali, the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. So Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali is a world-renowned scholar in his field of specialization. Currently, he is senior fellow at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia, as well as a senior fellow of the Academy of Sciences of Afghanistan. Professor Kamali has served as a member and sometimes chairman of the Constitution Review Commission of Afghanistan, as a UN consultant on constitutional reforms in Afghanistan. Professor Kamali has featured frequently in media, radio, TV, and the internet. He published an open letter and full-page article in the newspaper Berliner Zeitung just before the Taliban blew up the Bamiyan Statutes. So ladies and gentlemen, Professor Kamali was twice awarded with IIM Ismail Faruqi Award for Academic Excellence, and he features in the book, The 500 Most Influential Muslims in the World for 6th time. And he is recipient of the King Abdullah II International Award 2010 and many other awards. Well, based on these amazing backgrounds and credentials, I have to say that we are very fortunate and honored to have Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali as one of the most influential contemporary scholars in the Muslim world with us. So without further ado, I would like to invite my professor, my guru, Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali, to deliver his speech and sharing his presentation. فليتفضل مشكورا. Please.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. I am honored to be given this opportunity in this introduction. I hope I measure up to the expectations. Yes, a cautious optimism for the future of Afghanistan. This was my own impression during the first week of the Taliban takeover, based on their own statements. But looking more realistically at the background, the Taliban have been in government once before, and also insurgency for a longer time. In government in 1996 to 2001, that was also a peaceful takeover of government. They came at the tail end of the Mujahideen experience, and their record in that 5 years or so of government was not really one of, it was peaceful, but they have not created a very good impression on several fronts. Women's rights, human rights, women's education, and their suspected connection with Al-Qaeda. Because Osama Laden at one time was in some Tora Bora areas and had moved in and out of Afghanistan. And the war on terror that was started was based on that suspicion. But during this 5 years, they did two good things that they are remembered for it. One is that they eliminated the opium in drug trade, more or less, the cultivation and trade. And they established security. Afghanistan was secure during those 5 years. Now they have, well, even from those times and afterwards, when they started this as insurgents in 2001, their campaign was based on two things. One was to oust the Americans and foreigners from Afghanistan. They must leave. And the second, that the Sharia must be fully implemented in Afghanistan. Now, the first of these, that the foreigners must leave, has happened. But there is a lot of uncertainty what kind of government they are going to construct and what are the terms of the constitutional structure and basic commitments. Afghanistan had the 2004 constitution and a very large number of statutes, 60 statutes, a civil code, a criminal code. They have not declared their position, whether they will go back to the Sharia and the fiqh books, textbooks like many textbooks, the Hidayah and other textbooks that the Mujallat al-Ahkam al-Adliya, whether they, by implementing the Sharia, they mean going back 80 years of experience. Afghanistan has experienced reform of the Sharia. Every one of these legislation has brought certain adjustment to to harmonize the Sharia with the prevailing conditions of Afghanistan and Afghan society. There is this uncertainty. One hopes that they do not become too doctrinaire about the Sharia. The Sharia itself creates space for pragmatism. There is a doctrine, public law doctrine of siyasa shar'iyya that allows extra Sharia regulations in economy, in trade, in international relations. The Sharia creates space that accepts other rules. In fact, through history, even countries that applied the Sharia Saudi Arabia and others included, they had decree laws, farman, in Nizam, in Irada, in Afghanistan also, side by side with the Sharia. There were extra Sharia laws and position is taken to facilitate the affairs of the country. We do not know what kind of Sharia they are having in mind. They have not yet declared their support for the existing legal system of Afghanistan, nor have they invalidated it. But there is this apprehension. What are they going? They come at a time that internationally they are responsible to the world community. They come at a time of Islamophobia, fundamentalism. The world is suspicious, especially the Western world, of anything Islamic developments. But they say, here it is. They come in a big way. And this is the manifestation of what we were talking about. So they have this responsibility to prove if they are making these statements that we want to be friendly to the world, to all countries and so on, to show it in action. Afghanistan as a society has been faithful to the Sharia, but also to the commitment, a certain commitment as a moderate country and society, in harmony with the Quranic position, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We made you a midmost nation, to be witnesses over mankind, and the Prophet to be witnessed over you. To be witnessed, you must be committed to truth, to justice, and then you can be qualified to do good works. Why is there reason for cautious optimism? This is based on their promises and now in government. The initial statement by Mullah Baradar, even from Qatar, even before he came to Afghanistan, within the initial 2 or 3 days, I listened that, and he made a few commitments. One, that we come to serve the people and not to abuse power. The other, there is a general amnesty. We will not take anyone to task. The third was that we want to bring inclusive peace, all-inclusive peace, and work for having Afghanistan having experienced 4 decades of war. We want to change it. And their takeover was also peaceful, but they have a history of violence behind. They have been in the rage over these 20 years, especially the time of Ashraf Ghani, a questionable time. They became increasingly violent. People are suspicious because they have lost their loved one. The Taliban have not been a peaceful force for those years. Therefore, they do not enjoy public support. People are peaceful after their takeover. There is this peace, but there is a degree of apprehension. How do they prove themselves? Then they have also shown that they want to be recognized as to have international legitimacy. And they even recently, the foreign minister of the Taliban announced their wish that the United Nations General Assembly should, and the Secretary General, to invite Afghanistan to participate in the UNGA. But that has not happened. There is apprehension in the United Nations and the international community because the Taliban have not shown the promise they made that they will bring an inclusive government. That has not happened. The government that they brought into place is not inclusive, it's only the Taliban. And the other is, of course, that they have already introduced restrictions on women. And this is something that hangs on them unless they prove otherwise that suspicion exists. And that is one of the big reasons that there are negative activities on the girls' schools and women's position. They are not really qualified to sit in the international community for this kind of lack of respect for human rights, for women's rights. Half of the population of Afghanistan now is unhappy. They have also made statements that we will treat all Afghans equally, Muslim, non-Muslim, Shia and Sunni, and those statements. That that everyone in the existing government will remain in their positions, and all the existing practice will stay. But as far as the Sharia, since that is their basic commitment, unless they take positive action, we do not know. Then there is another positive aspect of the Taliban government is that they are internally united. Unlike Ashraf Ghani during his time, the government was internally disunited. Ghani and Abdullah, they never became united. And they could not agree on the appointment of ministers and so on. Whereas the Taliban did not have that. They came up with their cabinet and their structure fairly smoothly. They have also asked on occasions people for people support. We want the people to support us and to act according. So they have created this kind of people-friendly expectations, a ground for cautious optimism. There is no fighting in Afghanistan. There was an episode in Panjshir, and the Taliban did not show a very violent position, but tried to pacify. So they are also working in that spirit, that they do not want to violate and be aggressive. The other is the ground for optimism that after 40 years, 4 decades of war, now Afghanistan is experiencing peace because there is no enemy. The Taliban themselves are there. They have also the other good reason is that occupation forces have left the country. They have been ousted of the country. And already not only the Afghans, but the international community, including Malaysia, speaking in a way that they would not speak. The foreign minister, that's Saifuddin earlier, made very encouraging statements for Afghanistan, for the Muslim world, But when Americans were the occupation force, Malaysia will not speak in this language. They would rather leave it alone, but this has changed. And the Americans really have not left a good taste Afghans feel that they were subversive, they were there to dishonor Afghanistan, they were dishonest. That is something that they have been ousted, and that is perhaps something that together with the puppet government that they had installed. The 20 years of American occupation brought nothing but ruin. Security situation went from bad to worse. Then there was internal division within the government, poverty, degradation, official corruption, all went up. Despite those promises that we want to bring peace, good governance, democracy, nothing of this has been brought to Afghanistan. So what are then the factors that stand against the Taliban? One is the international community, the Pakistan is coming in, interfering, in fact, in Afghanistan affairs. This is something that the people of Afghanistan do not really like. Then the sanctions that the West is imposing sanctions, the Americans, United Nations have not recognized. Then the inclusive government that the Taliban promised has not happened, quite the contrary so far. And then, as I said, women position, their activities are not really promising. And negative developments have taken place, and people are even more apprehensive. Their words and their action have not matched. Those promises have not been kept. And then there is a certain kind of inactivity. Right now, Afghanistan does not have an effective government, even a month after. The financial system, there is the central bank and other banks are nominally active, but the economic system is still very slow. The market activity, people have left the country in very large numbers, and they have done very little to create the basis of confidence for the people. There is this suspicion that their record on human rights is not good, and they are not going to gain any credit from the people unless they positively become proactive and show it. They have closed the Ministry of Women Affairs. Instead, they open a new ministry, promotion of good and prevention of evil. This is good, but you don't have to shut the Women's Affairs Ministry. Afghanistan has to do a lot of work to improve the status of women. There have many things have happened, like the constitutions of Afghanistan, the equality clauses. Women have full equality according to the laws of the country. Now the Taliban, they go backward.
Assalamualaikum. Sorry, Prof. We'll give you extra time, 5 minutes.
Okay, I will finish. Then there is this poverty in hunger. This is an economic crisis that the financial system, the market activity, they have come to almost a standstill. So many people left the country and they have been busy with politics and this and that, not taking care of what is happening to the people, the life of the people. Then, of course, the Panjshir development was not a favorable development. There are internally displaced people, new refugees are being created, and there is economic dependency. They depend still on foreign aid, and there is this uncertainty. Unless they become economically creative and make these, the dormant situation fully active, they are not going to survive. They do not have budgeting, they do not have, these are the kind of factors that counts against them. But since it is, the country is peaceful, the foreigners have been ousted, there is a government, and the government is internally united. There is this eagerness that they want to be international, to gain international legitimacy. These are some of the positive factors that gives us hope for cautious optimism. But when I made that statement during the first week of the Taliban, I am more doubtful now whether that optimism remains as much as I had in the first week. I hope that we will have positive development to convince us that we have good reason for cautious optimism. But until then, the people are not trusting the Taliban yet. And there are negative developments, as I explained, unless the economy is becoming active and we have this robust commitment to rebuild Afghanistan. That is not happening yet. I will finish my comments, my speech. I thank you for your attention. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much to Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamani for your insightful ideas, deep observation, as well as highlight the key points about the reality and cautious optimisms of the Afghanistan future. What I can conclude, the situation if Afghanistan remains highly uncertain, and Afghanistan really needs inclusive peace, unity, and people's support to rebuild the nations. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, let's listen another perspective on cautious optimism of Afghanistan future with the second speaker, Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers, a senior lecturer with the Department of Strategic and International Studies, University of Malaya. He has also taught at the Malaysian Armed Forces Staff College and the Malaysian Defence Armed Forces College. In 2012, he obtained PhD from the International Islamic University, and his research interests are government and politics of the Central Asian republics and human rights condition in Xinjiang. His area of specialization includes political science, international relations, and history of China and Central Asia. He is one of the media resource persons for the RTM, Radio and Television Malaysia, Sinar Harian, and Astro Awani. Let us listen another perspective. Dr. Roy, the floor is yours. Dr. Roy? If we cannot get Dr. Roy, we can go to the third speaker, Dr. Abdul Razak Ahmad. Dr. Abdul Razak Ahmad, are you online?
Me?
Yeah, okay, I'm here.
Okay, all right. So, Dr. Roy also, all right. Okay, please, Dr. Roy, the floor is yours.
Dr. Roy.
Yeah. Please unmute Dr. Roy, the organizer. We cannot hear his voice. All right.
Right, thank you. Sorry, I was being muted. Yeah. So, right. Salam sejahtera, selamat pagi, and very good morning to the Honorable Foreign Minister, Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Datuk Ahmad Azam Abdul Rahman, Chairman of Global Peace Mission GPM, Commissioner to the Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission, Tan Sri Dr. Syed Hamid Alba, the former Foreign Minister, Saudara Muhammad Faisal Abdul Aziz, President of Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia ABIM, Saudara Ahmad Fahmi Muhammad Samsudin, CEO of GPM, distinguished panelists, Associate Professor Dr. Zulkifli Hassan, Moderator of Session 1, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, and respected audience. The Taliban took over Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, on August 15, 2021. This marks the end of the conflict between the Taliban and the United States that has lasted for 20 years. After taking over Afghanistan, the Taliban announced the establishment of an interim government on September 7, 2021. Therefore, the question arises of how international community, especially like-minded states like Malaysia, should respond. Respected audience, I have 5 points to share. First, the resurgence of Taliban in Afghanistan is already being anticipated. They are now working to gain international recognition. As such, Taliban 2.0, if you may call it, appears to be more pragmatic and is currently reorganizing and strategizing the governance. They have promised to be more inclusive with multi-ethnic participation. They have also stated to allow schools to be reopened and their willingness to provide educational opportunities for women based on the tenets of Islamic law. Perhaps the Taliban is maturing after 20 years of conflict. Now is the time for them to prove themselves and also to counter negative narrative against them. They need international cooperation in order to rebuild the country. Second, the international community must accept the fact that the Taliban has returned to power in Afghanistan. They are the de facto government of Afghanistan. It is therefore more appropriate to interact and engage with them than to isolate the Taliban from international community. Given the situation in Afghanistan is still uncertain, respective governments around the world want to take precaution and better understand the political and security development in Afghanistan before they can provide recognition. However, this should not be a barrier for international community, including Malaysia, from interacting with the Taliban-led government through humanitarian and reconstruction programs in Afghanistan. Respected audience. Third is the bilateral efforts through humanitarian programs to the Afghan people who have been in conflict for more than 4 decades. This can be done in collaboration between government and non-governmental organizations. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, or Wisma Putra, as the Honorable Foreign Minister Datuk Saifuddin has mentioned, that it has been channeling assistance through the Malaysian Technical Cooperation Program, MTCP, by providing training and scholarships to the Afghan. But I sincerely believe, in addition to that, other ministries today, including the Ministry of Health, MOH, can also share medical expertise to help improve health condition, especially in efforts to fight COVID-19 pandemic. Respected audience, COVID-19 cases in Afghanistan has reached over 150,000 and more than 7,000 deaths. Thus, the international community, including Malaysia, can use health diplomacy to assist Afghan people in the form of providing face masks, gloves, testing equipments, and vaccines. And I believe previously Malaysia has already, through health diplomacy, has offered vaccines assistance to Bosnia and Palestine. Perhaps this assistance can be extended to the Afghan population now. In addition to government efforts, non-governmental organizations have a very important role to play in easing the burden of the Afghan people and indirectly drawing the people of Malaysia closer to the Afghan people. This is an extra channel other than diplomatic efforts. It involves the movement of civil society to be directly involved in humanitarian activities and reconstruction of Afghanistan, regardless of religion, creed, or race. For example, the International Rescue Committee, IRC, Save the Children. Meanwhile, Malaysian non-governmental organizations that are already actively helping the Afghan people of Afghanistan, and they include Global Peace Malaysia. And I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Datuk Azam for his appointment. And also the Angkatan Belia Malaysia ABIN, My Care, Ikram Malaysia, Mercy Malaysia, and many more. There is still a lot that needs to be done. They include to supply the Afghan people with adequate pumps to draw fresh water, food, medicine, heating facilities. As now we are already in the month of September, or towards the end of September, within 2 months, winter approaches. And I believe the people need more heating facilities and also assistance to Afghan refugees in Iran and in Pakistan. In addition, non-governmental organizations that are always on location and aware of the real situation in Afghanistan. Therefore, they can act as advisors to the government because they have first-hand information on the current situation. Thus, we can have an alternate way to find out the issues regarding Afghanistan and not just relying on the media alone. While waiting for the government's decision to establish diplomatic relations with the new government, non-governmental organizations could serve as second-track diplomacy and informal liaison between Malaysian community and the Afghan people. That is why, as I said, Dato' Azam has an important role to play in it. And at the same time, it is desirable to establish a group of experts on Afghanistan to better understand the country. Such group may consist of non-governmental organizations and scholars that have knowledge on the politics, history, economics, social and culture of Afghanistan. For many people, including in Malaysia, we may not know much about Afghanistan and including Central Asia. Or some of us may know based on movies that we have watched maybe back in the 80s and all. So I believe that that should be a group of experts who know very well of Afghanistan. And the function of this group is to advise and provide point of reference as a point of reference of Afghanistan to the government and the general public. And my fourth point is cooperation through multilateral efforts, especially through international organizations such as the United Nations, Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC), and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO). SCO members such as Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and China, bordering Afghanistan, have a common interest in ensuring stability of Afghanistan is preserved. Central Asian countries, as I mentioned, together with Iran, have an advantage because they have cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious ties with the Afghan people, which dates back centuries ago. These countries should therefore be more proactive in the recovery and reconstruction of Afghanistan. Non-governmental organizations should also work with international organizations in humanitarian aid and reconstruction in Afghanistan. My dear respected audience, my fifth and last point is after the withdrawal of the United States, the future of Afghanistan is now entirely in the hands of the local population. The bitter experience from the conflict that had lasted for 40 years should be a lesson to all Afghan people. History has proven that former war-torn states such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Tajikistan, Vietnam, and Cambodia, which is nearer to our region, are now peaceful and developing. So it is not impossible for Afghanistan to achieve peace and normalcy. Like-minded states like Malaysia and concerned OIC members can channel humanitarian aid, but the future of Afghanistan is determined and worked out by the Afghan people themselves. With that, thank you very much. Tasakor, thank you.
Oh, welcome. Thank you very much to Dr. Roy for your insightful analysis as well as highlighting the key points about the reality, the situation and cautious optimism of the Afghanistan future from a very interesting perspective. Even when we talk about cautious optimism of Afghanistan future, even Vladimir Putin stated that Afghans should be allowed the right to determine their future. So I truly agree with you. The future of Afghanistan now is at the hands of Afghan people, not others. So brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, let us listen another perspective and dimension on cautious optimism of Afghanistan future with the third speaker, Dr. Abdul Razak Ahmad, the founding director of Baitul Amanah, a political think tank in Kuala Lumpur. He previously served as a special advisor to the Chief Minister of Johor and Minister of Higher Education Malaysia, as a consultant for the National Economic Action Council of the Prime Minister Department, he contributed to the drafting of the ninth Malaysian Plan. On the international front, Dr. Abdul Razak Ahmad has served as a consultant and policy advisor for higher education, democracy and development in Iran, Bahrain, Libya, Tunisia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Timor-Leste. So with his amazing credentials and backgrounds, hopefully that we listen from him another perspective. Dr. Abdul Razak Ahmad, falyatafaddal mashkura.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have listened to Professor Kamali and Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers. I have few points to make. I think number one, I want to clearly explain that one of our biggest challenge in dealing with the Taliban and in our effort to help the Afghanistan government, the Afghanistan people, is that we lack the understanding of the Taliban themselves. It's never easy to deal with the Taliban, and because we never had any experience, there have been very little interaction, there have been very little exposure, there have been very little knowledge. And there have been very little contact with the Taliban. So I am actually very cautious when we talk about, working together with the Taliban. In fact, the international community are very cautious because they also have very little knowledge and very little understanding and very little contact with the Taliban. I'm currently in Istanbul and I've been meeting quite a number of senior Turkish diplomats and Iranian diplomats in the region. They also have very little, communications with the Taliban. Many of the communications are being facilitated by the Qatari. Many are helping them from Pakistan and also Tajikistan and even Iran. So I think in dealing with the Taliban, we really have to put in perspective that our understanding of the Taliban is very limited, and it's very important for us to understand that without having the necessary network and the necessary contact, it's going to be very challenging. Couple of weeks ago, a very senior former British diplomat was telling me that, even the Prime Minister of Britain has dispatched a very senior religious leader from the United Kingdom to meet up with the Taliban leadership because they are actually deploying various kind of mechanisms and assistance from all parts of British establishment to help them understand the Taliban. So it shows that, dealing with the Taliban is not as easy as, the rhetoric has been manifested. Second, and another thing that I have to mention here is that even though Professor Kamali was saying that the Taliban has managed to portray a unity and have, been very united, and that's the reason why they have been able to form a government which is, quite a formidable one in many circumstances. I also have to say that there have been reports, and this has been verified by quite a number of intelligence agencies. There are factions in the Taliban themselves. There are differences. People in the political office do not command a lot of influence. And especially the military faction, you can't control the military factions. It's actually very hard to control the military faction, and this has been quite serious. And there have been recent rumors about Baradar was assassinated. Of course, it was not true, but it's true that there are factions, and it's true that there are people between Taliban themselves who are have huge differences between the political faction and the military faction, especially when people who are leading the political office has not been really on the ground over the last 20 years, 15 to 20 years. The third thing that I want to highlight here is I'm actually very cautious about the redevelopment of Afghanistan because the resource is very limited. Many people understand now that Afghan is being denied their own money, which is deposited in some of the American banks, and it's very hard to get the international community to release this funding. The country has been depending on foreign aids for a very long time. One of the American strategy was always been creating dependence on them rather than nation building. So these has actually created a lot of dependency on donors, and many of the international players, international organizations have left, and with very little resource, it's going to be very difficult for the the Taliban-led government to manage, especially when they have lost so many, when so many of the most talented Afghan have left, and these were the people who were running the ministries, managing the country before. So without all these international assistance, without all these internal resources, it's going to be a huge challenge for the Taliban. Another point that I would like to make today is that, despite our excitement in helping the Taliban, whatever Malaysia wants to do in that part of the world must feed the strategic interests of Malaysia in the region. It cannot be just Taliban. It cannot be just Afghanistan per se. What do we intend to do in that particular part of the world? How are we going to navigate our policy with, the Central Asian government, with Iran, even with India for this sake? I think it's very important for us to understand that, helping the Afghan government, helping the Taliban government is not just about helping the Afghan people, but we must also be able to determine what kind of strategic interests that Malaysia has in that particular region, especially realigning it also with our Middle East foreign policy interests. I think Malaysia has been very, silent in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, despite the initial, humanitarian assistance that we have extended. But over the last 20 years, during the, Hamid Karzai's and also Ghani's administration, we could not even set up an embassy in Kabul. And I remember a conversation that I had with one very senior Taliban diplomat, and it happened in Kuala Lumpur, that there was even a move for on the part of the Ashraf Ghani's administrations to even close the embassy in Malaysia because of Malaysia's inactivism in helping the Taliban, in helping the Afghan government. So this has to change. It cannot continue to be like this. And I think it's very important for us to reposition back our strategic interests in the region. And whatever that we want to do in that part of the world, I think it must be supported with very strong analysis, very strong intelligence, very strong brain trust. And the international communities are struggling to understand these. Despite, I give you an example of how mighty the American brain trusts are. They are very powerful. They have very brainy people advising them on Afghanistan, on the region. But yet they didn't even predict the falls of Ghani's government in a matter of 11 days. And you're talking about, mobilizing the very best people. And I think now they are struggling to understand how could that happen. That's something which is so difficult to comprehend. And this is why I think whatever that we want to do in that part of the world, and whatever strategy that we have with that part of the world, it must be really based on very strong intelligence and very strong, strategic advisory and very strong brain trust. And we don't have this capability. Many countries doesn't have this capability. Only very few countries have such a deeper understanding of Afghanistan and the politics and also the Taliban. Pakistan, for example, I know that many people are not very happy with the way the Pakistan is, navigating the issue. But I think you have to rely a lot on Pakistan. They have been the biggest ally of the Taliban, and they have been accommodating the Taliban in so many ways. So they understand how to deal with Taliban. We don't understand. They have to go and we have to go and work with the Pakistanis. The Iranians too have a very deep understanding of the Taliban. They've been talking. I met with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, and he has been explaining to me in great details of what the Iranian government have been doing and how they have managed to host the Taliban delegations in Tehran, how they have been able to provide sanctuary, safe sanctuary to the Taliban. And I think it's very important for us to understand that, if we are to operate in the region, we really have to leverage on our network with the Pakistan, with the Iranians, with the Tajik, even with, to a certain extent, with some of the Middle Eastern countries, especially Qatar. I'm also, as Professor Kamali pointed out, the Taliban's dealing with the Al-Qaeda and with terrorist organization is worrying. It's really worrying. And I foresee that they are not going to simply abandon all this, or they are not simply going to, sever their relationship with the terrorist organization. They have been, providing sanctuary to these people for a very long time. It is not 1 or 2 days. It has been 30 over years, and there are a lot of ideological similarities. They share a lot of ideological similarities. So, and also I think they are going to use this as their leverage in dealing with the Western power. If you do not help us, if you do not come with, the necessary assistance to us, we are going to continue with, sheltering these people. So I do not think that the Taliban is going to simply abandon their relationship with Al-Qaeda and also the other terrorist organization. It is in their strategic interest to keep these people at a distance, but, to leverage on them when there is a need to do so. And I think the last point that I want to probably highlight here is that if the Taliban is not able to deliver what they're supposed to be delivering in the next probably 9 months to a year, I think civil war is very possible. And this is an assessment which has been provided by the Pakistan intelligence services. This is also the assessment, shared by the Qataris to people in the region, and Turkey is very aware of this. Of course, Turkey does not really enjoy very close relationship with the Taliban, though they tried their very best, because Turkey is part of NATO, and it's always very, they're always very suspicious of Turkey in many ways. That's the reason why the Istanbul conference that Turkey had, initiated was not very successful, unlike Qatar. Qatar has been involved with Taliban over the last 10 years. They have invested so much in becoming an impartial, mediator. So I think this issue of civil war must be, taken into consideration. There is a likelihood that this is going to happen if the Taliban is not going to, able to deliver, and with the kind of limitations that they have. certainly there are a lot of challenges for them to deliver. And the moment people feel that, they cannot anymore tolerate these, the NATO and the other Western powers will certainly leverage on these and probably support insurgencies against the Taliban. And I think before I end, I just want to again emphasize, I've been talking about it. I think there have been so many wrongs about Afghanistan. When we first invaded Afghanistan, when the Americans first invaded Afghanistan, they were wrong, When they wanted to exit, they were wrong. They didn't do it properly, they didn't plan it properly. The strategy in dealing with the Afghan government before were wrong. It was nothing about nation building. It was so much about countering terrorism. It was so much about military. It was so much about hard power, there were so many wrongs. And I think we cannot commit these wrongs anymore. We have to do it right this time around. I think in the case of Malaysia, for example, not having a mission over in Afghanistan over the last 20 years could not happen again. It has got to be addressed. We have to be serious about this. We are independent. We have a very independent policy, a foreign policy, but we should also have a very active foreign policy. And I think it's time for us to really relook at what needs to be done and how to do it right. And I think our focus for the time being really should center on humanitarian assistance, as Dr. Roy has pointed out. This is an area in which I think is neutral and it can help, enhance our visibility, and it's something which is very much needed now. Rather than looking into the politics of it or dealing with into the politics of it. And I think, of course, the second area in which Malaysia has the necessary strength, and that should be the focus, is the capacity building. The Taliban are left with very few people. The appointment of this governor of the central bank, he has never dealt with modern economy before. How is he going to manage trade and economic policy and monetary policy? So I think this is the kind of things that we have to be realistic about, dealing with the new regime that we have in Afghanistan now. We should really focus on something that is doable, something that we can actually implement, something that we can actually, realize. I think that's for the time being, and I would be very happy to entertain questions from time to time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Abdul Razak for your interesting analysis and highlight various important issues and challenges about the reality of Afghanistan.
I can't hear you, Professor Zul.
Okay. Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me? Assalamualaikum.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much to Dr. Abdul Razak for your interesting analysis and highlight various important issues and challenges about the reality of Afghanistan. The future of Afghanistan remains uncertain, but we must admit that there is a lack of understanding about Taliban with Afghan people, little interactions, little knowledge, and little contact with them. So we really need structural, developmental, cultural changes. If we fail to respond, Dr. Abdul Razak highlighted this very, very important for us to remind is, if we fail to respond as it sees, Afghanistan civil war is very possible and likely to happen. So while idea is to be led. So brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I will not talk much because we have a lot of questions from the audience, from the participants. If we can see through the chat, there are many questions actually, especially to Professor Kamali. But let me open first to anyone who wants to voice his questions now. Anyone? Before I move to the chat. Anyone want to pose your questions?
Dr. Farish raising his hand.
Yes, Dr. Farish, please.
Unmute yourself.
Organizer, please unmute Dr. Farid. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. And I have a question to the panel as a whole, and this is related to what Dr. Abdul Razak raised earlier. The point about the Taliban leveraging vis-a-vis the West by keeping groups like Al-Qaeda at arm's length. I think the point was made by the panel that we need to have a brain trust and better knowledge of Afghanistan. The only thing I would argue here is that we cannot and should not study Afghanistan as a singularity because of its geographical position and its geostrategic importance. It is, of course, important that we understand Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is not alone. It is smack in the middle of Central Asia, and it is surrounded by major superpowers, not only the West, but also Russia and China. And so if you're going to understand the situation, and I do share Dr. Abdul Razak's concern about the possibility of internal conflict, this internal conflict will be engineered. It'll be engineered by external actors that are very close by, all of which have interests in Central Asia in general and Afghanistan in particular, particularly because of its minerals, oil, gas, and rare earths. And so, unfortunately, for the people of Afghanistan, they are not at some remote corner of the world. They are smack in the middle between three major competing superpower interests. And I think if you're going to analyze and do a risk assessment of the situation in Afghanistan, my only request is that we don't just focus on Afghanistan, but we have to place Afghanistan in the broader context of geopolitics. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Farish. Perhaps Dr. Abdul Razak may want to respond.
Well, I kind of agree more with Dr. Farish. I think that observation is valid, and certainly when we deal with Afghanistan, our understanding is not just about understanding of Afghanistan. We must really understand the region, because the region is really very complex and it's very, in many ways, interrelated. There are a lot of power play in the region, and in Afghanistan itself, everybody are very keen and everybody are interested to be seen visible. And I think this is where we need to leverage on our network with Iran in particular, Pakistan, and also some Central Asian countries. I think it's very important for us to establish, an immediate contact with our friends in the region, Iran, Pakistan, and also Central Asian countries, and get them to help us with their assessments. And from there, we should be able to really craft our own strategy in dealing with this Afghanistan issue.
Thank you. Dr. Roy, you may want to respond as well. Unmute, Dr. Roy.
Yeah. I would totally agree with what my colleague, Dr. Farish mentioned. In fact, I teach a course on Central Asia, and I always make it a point to highlight Afghanistan. We need to understand the history of Afghanistan is well connected to the history of the region during the Great Game that was in the 18th century, and now what we call the New Great Game that involves the Central Asian republics, the major powers as in China, Russia, Iran. So you cannot just look at Afghanistan per se as a state, but the dynamics of the regional politics. That is why I in my fourth point, I mentioned about the importance of the Central Asian republics in the reconstruction of Afghanistan because of the well connection historically and currently as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. I would like to raise these questions from Dr. Alino, which is very interesting. And I combined it with the questions by Brother Saleh. Yeah. So the questions to Professor Hashim Kamali. Okay. Could you explain about the cultural and religious diversities of Afghan people, and also the situations of the universities and intellectual culture of Afghanistan? And why Pashtun intellectual, including secular figures, support Taliban? Prof. Hashim Kamali?
Well, culturally, Afghanistan is a tribal society. It has been, there are 4 or 5 ethnic groups, and the Pashtuns are numerically the majority, probably, then the Tajiks, and then the Turkomans and Uzbeks and Hazara. Afghanistan has historically been struggling against tribalism to establish a central, effective central government. Has been a position that is well established and followed by different governments consistently. The internal kind of relationship among the tribes has generally been not as bad as one might expect. There is a certain kind of, understanding and interaction. Afghanistan has not followed like ethnic or racist politics. What you have in the forefront of government policies is economic developments, peace, and financial problems and so on, but not really featuring ethnicities. Now, the Taliban is, of course, they are the Pashtuns from Kandahar. And there are questions, how do we deal with the Hazaras, with the Tajiks and so on. The Tajiks of Panjshir, they did oppose the Taliban, and there was a hiccup, but it doesn't seem to have sustained. It seems to have quietened down. I think that the people of Afghanistan will generally not support ethnic politics unless the government plays that card. So like Ashraf Ghani, because of his internal weaknesses, he started to play the tribal politics. Like to beat the Taliban, he encouraged Dostum. He gave him a marshal, became Marshal Rashid Dostum, became general and then a marshal because he was from the north. The Uzbeks and others could oppose the Pashtuns, but that did not have really a very good reception. And Ashraf Ghani did not really gain people acceptance and support. I think that the Pashtun Wali, the code, the Pashtun traditional kind of customary codes of behavior are still influential. They have a kind of like the jirga system, some good aspects. You know, when they have local problems, they refer it to the jirga, to the local tribal council. Some of those have gained acceptance, but generally speaking, the government, the constitution, official policy has not followed the tribalist line. It has actually tried to suppress the tribal kind of, politics and develop national unity. And I think that the tribes among themselves are not very forceful to asserting themselves. Generally speaking, through history, longer history, 1 or 2 centuries, the Pashtuns have always been the government. And they have developed this insight and kind of capacity to rule more or less even-handed. among the tribes. Even the Taliban announced that we will treat Muslim, non-Muslim, ethnic groups, Shia, all equally. The Pashtuns have done this better than perhaps the other. They have hardly been in power, these other groups. So this is the kind of pattern that you have. There is a certain degree of precedent for Pashtun being the ruling power. The Pashtun have themselves established a kind of even-handedness, and culturally, I think the Pashtuns are open to other ethnic groups, and they include. That is what people now want, that it must be inclusive, but we have to see.
Right, thank you, Prof. Kamali. We have many questions actually, but we have another 6 minutes. We try to answer at least 2 questions. Let me pose this one question to Dr. Abdul Razak and another question to Dr. Roy. Okay, number 1, questions to Dr. Abdul Razak. How do you foresee the consequences of the Taliban government towards Southeast Asia security? This is to Dr. Abdul Razak from Waija Salmia. And another question to Dr. Roy. Okay, what is needed now? What is the priority? Okay, thank you. We'll start with Dr. Abdul Razak.
Well, many people will think that, there will be, resurgence of terrorist activities in Southeast Asia because of what happened in Taliban, and they will give inspirations. But I believe that the international cooperation when it comes to countering terrorism has been very advanced. Our security fraternity has been very, sophisticated in many ways. There have been extensive sharing of intelligence. There have been extensive sharing of data. There have been extensive sharing of, resources. And we have benefited a lot from, international assistance when it comes to understanding terrorist movement, and I think with the pandemic happening, it also has given a lot of restrictions for mobility of people from Malaysia to Afghanistan or Afghanistan to this part of the world. So if you ask me about whether what happened in Afghanistan is going to inspire terrorist activities, to a certain extent, probably a small inspiration to some small factions of, militant groups in the region. But I do not foresee that this is going to, contribute to a greater resurgence of terrorist activities in the region. And bear in mind that, over the last 20 over years of the Taliban fighting against the American, we had no record of any Malaysian traveling to Afghanistan in support of the Taliban and fighting alongside with the Taliban. I think Dr. Ahmad can also verify this. Unlike during the Mujahideen days, many of those terrorist movement that used to be operating in the region, like CIMB Islamic, for example, Abu Sayyaf, for example, were inspired by the Mujahideens when they came back from Afghanistan. But there was a different period. After that, we have no record of Malaysians traveling to that part of the world to fight alongside with the Taliban. So, if you ask me, I think it's not going to be affecting security in Southeast Asia in many ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Roy, what is needed and what is our priority?
I think our priority first is to assist the people of Afghanistan. Yes, there are politics that is going on in Afghanistan, has been there and it will continue. But the most important to me now is to assist the people of Afghanistan. As we are speaking to now at this very moment, there are people who need help. And as I mentioned in my speech earlier on, winter is around the corner. They are facing the problem of COVID-19. People are dying. People in dire need of help. So I think our number one priority is to the people of Afghanistan. Meantime, we enhance, as my colleague Dr. Razak also mentioned, the understanding of Afghanistan, the understanding of Taliban. We should also seek assistance from Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asia in order to better understand the politics, and eventually maybe coming to having a diplomatic relations, but that may take time. But people are dying, people are suffering. So number one priority, the people of Afghanistan, humanitarian assistance and rebuilding of the country.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Roy. I just
Dr. Zul, can I just add a little?
Yeah.
Just add a little.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think contact is very important. We need to establish contact immediately, you know, and I think this is something which is very urgent, and it is we are not doing enough. We should really immediately establish contact, and we can actually use and leverage our relationship with Pakistan and Qatar to immediately make contacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just received a message from the organizer. We have extra 10 minutes. So Brother Fadlullah Wilmot, please.
Somebody please unmute him.
Unmute, Mr. Fadlullah. Try to assist him.
Mute.
Yeah.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, fine. Thank you. No, I would just like to ask a couple of questions to the panel. Having worked in Afghanistan for 5 years in humanitarian, there are many issues in Afghanistan that need to be dealt with. There are 1.5 million orphans. There are about 5 million internally displaced people. So yes, there is a definite need for aid to the people of Afghanistan, but will the Taliban, looking at the people they're putting in charge of ministries, looking at the lack of inclusion of Hazara, looking at how many Hazara have been killed already, how much trust can we put in the Taliban? How much link do we have with real people on the ground? In Afghanistan, there is Akbar, which is the Afghan Committee on Relief and Development, which is made up of Afghan NGOs and international NGOs. This is an organization which perhaps we could be working with if we can't work through the government. But I do feel that we have to be very careful with dealing with the Taliban, because they have not changed, and they're going to impose their grisly, inhumane form of Sharia punishments on Afghanistan. It's going to be a very grim future for people. So I see, and we need to support the people of Afghanistan, but how can we do so without legitimizing the Taliban? And I agree with, I can't remember the doctor's name from Turkey. I think we don't have enough knowledge of Afghanistan, of the people of Afghanistan, of the politics. And I think if taking any action, Malaysia has to be very careful what role it's going to play. I know Malaysia's hospital in Afghanistan was very much appreciated by people. That sort of humanitarian role could be of very great use. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Prof. Hashim Kamali might want to respond to Mr. Fadlullah.
Yes, I agree with him about his views on aid in helping the people of Afghanistan. It is important that we focus on the people and their needs rather than Taliban as a group. As for the relation with the Hazara people, the Taliban have spoken that they will be inclusive. The government that they structure will be an inclusive government. They have failed on that. The government and the ministries have not included not only the Hazaras, but the Tajik and the Uzbeks and others also. There has been difficulties, as you said rightly, between the element of trust between Taliban and the Hazara was not there, and there were excesses, the Taliban excesses, when they were an insurgent. Because the Taliban have shown to be anti-Shia, kind of strongly anti-Shia, in the Hazaras or Shia. But when they became government, because I think Taliban, part of their credibility is to kind of hardline Islamic position. But now in government, they seem to be adjusting that, saying that they mentioned that we will treat all people, including Shia, non-Muslims, and this and that, equally. So this is a different positioning. We will have to see whether they can change the position of becoming more inclusive in the government structure, and also showing and through their policies that they are actually acting on their promises of equally treating all of us equally. I don't hear you. I can't hear you.
Dr. Zul, you have to...
Sorry. Perhaps Dr. Roy and Dr. Abdul Razak want to respond and to reflect as well, 2 minutes each.
All right, very quick. I may not take more than 2 minutes actually. As I mentioned earlier on, that I mentioned the track to diplomacy. Okay, while the issue of recognizing Taliban or to understand time, we need time, but at the same time, the people needs our help. So one way to get over it or get around it is to track to diplomacy. That is through our NGOs, INGOs, to go to the people themselves. As the person who asked the question, we have a hospital in Afghanistan and it's much appreciated. So that's what I mean by a track to diplomacy, not through the track one diplomacy, but to track to diplomacy to reach out directly to the people. And I think this is very important, and also to prevent them going through the problem of suffering, and which may lead them to radicalization and things like problems.
Radical.
Yeah. So that, I think that is my immediate response.
Thank you. Dr. Abdul Razak?
I have two things. Number one is this notion of inclusivity. The Taliban is not used to this inclusiveness notion. The idea of inclusiveness is alien to them. They are now trying to accommodate that, but even that is not good enough. But you have to understand the Taliban. It is impossible for us to impose upon the Taliban inclusiveness when many other countries surrounding the region, for example, I don't have to mention some Middle Eastern countries, for example, they have never been inclusive in the cabinet formation, no representative of women, or even if they are representative of women, it's actually a very, junior ministers, So you expect Taliban, who had just come into power a couple of days ago, to have, a government like, any Western government. So I think that's really not fair. And I think the other difficulty that Taliban is actually facing is the force, the military segment is also pushing for a lot of, bargain. So I think that will put them in a very difficult position for them to accommodate many others. On Hazara, I can say that, they have now a deputy minister who is a Hazara. They're trying their very best, but I think Iran is actually working very hard to get the Taliban to understand the context of working with the Hazaras, and I think for the time being, it seems like it's quite promising. I can be too optimistic, but it's quite promising. The other aspect which Brother Fadullah Wilmot mentioned, I think one of the best way for us to start our humanitarian assistance initiative is to actually work with some of our partners in the region. He pointed out very rightly that, we have to identify our partners and leverage on them, but also working with some of the governments in the region, on humanitarian issues. Iran, Tajikistan has been telling the whole world that, look, they have been accommodating the Afghans over the last 30, 40 years, millions of them. Nobody left, nobody assisted them. The Tajik gentleman who participated in one of our recent webinar on Afghanistan pointed out 20 over years, nobody assisted the Tajikistan government. Not even a single cent was given to them, to assist the Afghan people. So I think it's time for us to really leverage on our network in the region to start working with them, especially for people who are displaced and people who have left Afghanistan and who are now, trying to get finding shelter in the regional countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah, summa alhamdulillah, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. With that, we have come to the end of this session. We are now beginning to realize that the political standards, norms of behavior cannot be imposed on Afghan people, ignoring the country's ethnic and religious structure, historical traditions. This understanding is a hope that will lead to more efforts and positive developments for the re-emergence of the nations of Afghanistan. Once again, on behalf of the organizer, we would like to thank our speakers, moderators, participants for your presence. We would also like to apologize for any shortcomings and weaknesses to Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali, Dr. Roy Anthony Rogers, Dr. Abdul Rahman Ahmad. Utmost thanks and heartfelt gratitude for your wonderful thoughts and amazing ideas. Congratulations to the organizer, GPM, especially to Yang Berbahagia Dato' Ahmad Azam Abdul Rahman, Brother Ahmad Fahmi Shamsuddin, and Muhammad Faisal Abdul Aziz, the President of AFBIM, and all collaborators for organizing and hosting such a timely conference as a platform to gather all the experts from different perspectives. It is hoped that this kind of program will continue to be a platform for the meeting of the intellectual minds and help strengthen the spirit of brotherhood and stimulate our intellectual thought. May Allah bless all of us. With that note, I hand over this session back to the Master of Ceremony. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to our speakers for the thought-provoking session, and also thank you to Mr. Dr. Zulkifli Hasan for the moderating of our second session for this morning.